So I'm just going to throw this question out because we don't have to go in depth at all, but I just want to put this sort of as philosophically a big thing, because sometimes we hear this rubric thing, right? Is that something we should be using? Is it something that is helpful? And maybe how do we define what is a rubric? And again, we're not going to spend a ton of time. I just want to get this out here because this is a key phrase sometimes people use. And I think in Populi, there are a lot of opportunities to use rubrics. So what is a rubric, first of all? Somebody have a good definition that, Aaron, what is a rubric? Calling on the students. There we go.
A rubric is a tool that assists students in knowing what is expected on an assessment, and it assists the grader in being consistent in evaluating that assessment. There are lots of different types of rubrics, and in our ed classes, we even talk about the difference between like a scoring guide and a rubric. A scoring guide just helps you assign numbers. A rubric, a true rubric, has a descriptive feature for every possible result on the assessment. And that can seem unwieldy. It can seem big and broad, but it does. It helps students identify what they need to do to be successful on an assessment, and it helps the grader be consistent in how they grade it, and it actually saves a lot of time.
Yeah.
Every assessment does not need a rubric. I would say we want to be creating and designing rubrics for those big assessments that are measuring the course outcomes and the goals of segments. You're not creating rubrics necessarily for those little check-in assessments and smaller assignments. Yeah.
I want to say that, yeah, he's got it exactly right. It helps the student because it already articulates the outcomes. A rubric should measure the outcomes you've already pre-designed in your backward design method, or however you've chosen to do it. The rubric should reflect those outcomes. And as a grader, when I use a rubric, I could be on my 37th or 80th paper about the same topic. I start to get fatigued in how I perceive student writing. I get derailed by I can easily get derailed by, punctuation. But if punctuation isn't part of my rubric, I shouldn't be grading them on it. So it really does provide that continuous reminder for the grader of what the important outcomes were. What was the priority for this assessment that I've given the student, and helps the grader then be as true to that as possible. So I really personally enjoy them and think that they help me stay on track instead of becoming fatigued with those long days of reading.
So as we think about designing our courses for the fall, do you think like every class could use rubrics? Like a math class, an English class, a biology class, in some way?
Outside of multiple choice, or as I refer to them, multiple guess exams, I'm a firm believer that a rubric should be used on any non-objective type of assessment.
Okay.
Especially, and let me back up. For any non-objective assessment that is measuring a course outcome, that it's a big component of a course, you should be using a rubric. It prevents bias, like Jen says. It helps you make sure that what is important is weighted. So I'm not, if I'm just giving you a number out of 100 on a paper, and you didn't have very good punctuation and grammar, so I take off 10 points, but your content was excellent. I got to make sure that the rubric helps me measure what I'm intending to measure.
Yeah. And that the students know that ahead of time, right? Like, here's the rubric I'm using, so that when you're writing your paper, you realize I'm actually going to be giving you between a 0 and a 10 on your introduction, asking this question, did it state the thesis? That's
We
the question I'm
always-
looking for in there.
Yeah, we always attach our rubric with the assignment description. So when we hand out the assignment, we hand out the task, it comes with the rubric up front. So students already can see what the target is.
In good assessment practice, the student should never be surprised by the tool you use, meaning they should always see it ahead of time. They should never not understand how you're choosing to assess them. And if you're using any kind of scoring guide or numerical assignment of points per section, that should all be up front, because that's only fair to the learner, that they have a fair shot at meeting your expectation. So our expectations, I guess is what I'm saying, should never be secret from our students as to what we're looking for in the assignments we give them.
And
Yeah,
then
you hear that
also,
a lot of times. Students get frustrated with that. Yeah.
Also, I think it helps us as teachers, because if we develop our grading rubrics as a part of that, the beginning of the backward design, tied very closely to our outcomes, then the advantage of that is it helps clarify our teaching, because rubrics force us to break down the big statements into more workable pieces. So it not only helps the student at the end, it helps my teaching leading up to that.
That's right. And
Yeah.
some, and Aaron's right. I think those need to be included in syllabi along with the assignments as they are. And you can put those in general. So like your writing rubric, for example, can go at the bottom of a syllabi, but applies to many assignments across the course of that. But I think some faculty get in this idea, well, there's one like magic rubric that will assess everything. Well, no, you have to be creative, and you have to think through individual assignments, how they relate to your outcomes, and making sure that rubric matches that up as well. I think it's also a departmental issue as well. So I know in the School of Ministry, we have a biblical integration rubric that we use. And so we use that in our theology, our Bible, our Christian ministry, our intercultural studies classes. And so we use that to do an assessment for specific outcomes that we have as a department that play into specific assignments. And so that becomes very helpful. So when a student, I fear for the faculty member that just reads a paper and simply puts a grade at the bottom of the paper, and then the students wonder, well, why did I get that grade? If they saw highlighted cells that were colored or whatever, it's like, then a pushback could be, well, your writing mechanics here, your syntax, or your biblical integration, just you didn't get the context of the passage or whatever it might be. And that's so much more helpful in providing feedback so that the student actually knows what is required of them.
Yeah,
there's a lot of teacher hacks that make creating rubrics not as daunting. There's entire websites that will help you make rubrics that are free. Rubistar.com or org is one of our favorites. But also, as you start to develop your own bank, like if I'm going to sit down and make a new rubric for assignment now, it doesn't take me very long, because I have these other ones that I've already created. And so I want the grammar piece of this rubric. I want the content piece. And so my character traits on the left and the descriptors along, those rows, I can grab a row from different rubrics and construct something that pretty quickly, actually, so that I'm hitting each, and maybe it's a 25-point assignment, and I can only think of 4 categories. So I'll double, the content is really the most important thing. So I'm going to double that row, so it's worth 10 instead of 5, or, there's just different little hacks that you can use. Going back to something Sam said a while ago, rubrics are also great when you do peer and self-assessment. We use rubrics a lot in our education classes when they're going to be a peer assessed or self-assessed. We give them a rubric that they fill out on themselves or on their peers, so that there's better feedback peer-to-peer or on yourself. Because again, the clarity and the removal of bias and the focus on the learning target gets highlighted when you use a rubric.
That's good.
I think another reason here is that a lot of faculty will be surprised, and I think pleasantly surprised, that in Populi, it's much easier to create rubrics than it was in Converge. And then also, I think just the adaptability of being able to look at the paper in its format in Populi and then use the grading rubrics as you go along. I think some faculty be pleasantly surprised that you're going to save a lot of time in grading the more you integrate rubrics into your actual courses.
So you played around with that some, Sam?
Yeah. It's much, I've done rubrics in Converge, and I've played around with them in Populi, and they're so much easier to set up, and they're more flexible than they are in Converge.
Yeah, I was playing around with it last night, Sam, and I felt the same thing. It was super easy to create a rubric and assign it to multiple assessments. So if you have 4 of the same, we're doing 4 book reviews or 4 article reviews, you can just create one rubric and have it apply to each of those same assessments. So you didn't have to create one for each assessment back like you did in Converge.
Right.
A huge time saver, huge.
And those rubrics, when you create them, as you're clicking on the cells, they're automatically feeding into the grade book, which is very nice as well.
Yeah.
Something that a feature that whether or not Converge could do it, I never found out how to do it, but I had to.
Yeah,
use
it could. It was a long
and then I had
process,
to
but
go back
yeah.
to the grade book and assign it. But this one works intuitively within the grade book, which is very nice. So it's going to save time on that as well.
That might be fun to maybe have, or just do like a workshop or something, and just kind of, here's what I want to assess, and just sort of, roundtable, like, okay, here's what I would do. We're actually, and maybe even click on the thing while we're doing it. And so, yeah, well, very good. I appreciate all of these ideas. I think just that challenge of having everybody think of how you can use rubrics in your class, would be a great goal to have, because I've, like you guys, once I started using that, it made it go a lot quicker, and the feedback to the students was more specific, because they knew, oh, actually you lost 10 points on the overall writing or something. Your idea was really good, but try to use a comma every once in a while, maybe, or whatever, right? And it'll help your ideas be more clear. So yeah, well, sweet. Well, thank you guys for participating, and we will next time look at I think we're going to look at like activities, right? Like how to actually engage students in specific things. So thank you guys very much, and we'll see you next time.